Okay, this lunch learner will be a bit different since we don't have any lunch. We only have the learn part, but we are going to talk about creating infrastructure with AWS Cloud Development Kit, or CDK for short. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, let's start with some basic concepts first. First of all, what's AWS CDK? This tool was created by AWS for their main services. AWS is huge and it has a lot of services available for the public, but it is basically an open source software development framework to model and provision your cloud application resources using familiar programming languages. Notice the highlight on the familiar programming languages. We are trying to use what we already know as developers, and I think JobCity doesn't have any or doesn't have so much DevOps team, and I'll be talking a lot of DevOps concepts here on this presentation. So it's a good thing for us as regular developers to take a dive into this DevOps world. Again, I'm not an expert on DevOps. My background is more API focused or more backend focused, but let's see what we can learn today. Okay, another concept, it's IAC. It means infrastructure as code, and basically is a best practice in DevOps that uses high-level coding languages to basically avoid manually creating or managing IT resources, right? When you are creating an app, an application, or whatever you are using, you need to not only think what the code does, but only how it's being used. So you need to think in the infrastructure as well. So there are a couple of best practices for managing IT resources, but basically this is one of the one people uses, which is basically with the code, configuration files, templates, using high descriptive coding languages to manage IT resources. Okay. So there's a couple of competitors in IAC world. I'm not familiar with a couple of those, but the ones that I know that are being used in our real world applications are the Terraform and AWS, which is the one we are going to talk today. If you want to take a deeper dive or do some research, you can find this useful. Okay, so I'm talking about DevOps, and we usually don't use DevOps, or usually we have a team dedicated to DevOps, and when we need something, just talk to the DevOps team, and we need a server, we need a hosting, we need some permissions or whatever. But as developers, why should we care about learning a tool of DevOps or something about DevOps? Okay, probably you are familiar with this software pipeline, and it usually starts with some planning, maybe some coding, building that code for certain environments, either dev, testing, or production. With these tools, we need to test that code in order to make sure it is okay, it do what it should do. Usually have a release, which is actually deploying it to a server, a live server, and then we usually operate with this like a post-release phase, and it all start all over again. We are familiar with this pipeline, but in this pipeline, actually, developers take care of maybe planning, some coding, writing some tests, which is a good practice. But actually, DevOps take care of the rest, right? Building, maybe building some Docker images, repositories, that kind of stuff, releasing, which is actually deploying the code, and the post-release, maybe seeing some logs, errors, make sure it is working okay. But actually we have more things in common, right? And we need each other. It's not always about the good-looking software and my great app, but also the software needs to run fast, need to run smoothly on a server. And if you have a great app but bad infrastructure, it won't work. It won't do what it should do. Okay, so after that a small introduction about DevOps, there's a couple of ways you can create infrastructure, right? There is manually, so there is the manual way, right? Which is the common one, is that it means that you can enter your AWS account or your whatever provider is, and you create you hit some, you click some buttons, fill some form, click save, and voila, you have a working bucket or wherever you need, a database maybe. But this is not good all the time, right? Most of us know that this is not the best way to do it. It's easy, cool, but it's not a best practice. It's not documented anywhere, so it has happened that when you create this kind of infrastructure, you go back to the same project that you worked for 3 months, I don't know, and you can forget about it because it's not written anywhere. So it's not the best way to do it, right? Next, we have, maybe you can automate some stuff, and you say, okay, I want to write some scripts and I want to use the CLI to achieve what I want. And yeah, it's cool, right? It's easy. You can create a script file with your infrastructure, maybe create a bucket, database, and a server, let's say, for example. But we have some downsides, right? We don't have error handling. What happens if you have 5 commands and it fails in the middle of the script? You will have like a failed state of your infrastructure, and it's not the best way to do it. You have to probably fix it manually, and it's not a good practice, okay? So then we have a next level, which is IAC configs, or templates are called. And if you have worked with DevOps before, probably you are familiar with this type of concept. It works, right? You have to create some config file, some resource in this case. You're creating a bucket, you define the name of the bucket, blah, blah, blah. Cool, but what happens for us as developers? We need to learn a new syntax. We need to learn maybe some property names. We need to know what a resource is in this scenario. So you have to learn something new, and that's not what I want to show you guys here, right? And AWS basically uses the same idea, which is like a template files, configuration files. In this case, is a JSON file, but it could be a YAML or whatever. But again, this is not as easy as creating an object, right? You have to learn some properties. Of course, you can use your IDE to autocomplete maybe some of the property, but again, you need to learn a new tool, and that's not the case here. Then comes the SDK. Most tools have SDKs nowadays, and we are seeing some improvements, right? We are calling a function, sending some parameters. Now you have error handling, but there's a couple of things here to notice. One of them is that you are creating components, individual components, right? You are creating one bucket and one Lambda and one database or whatever resource you want, but it's not part of a whole. What happens if you delete one of these components and don't forget about deleting the actual component in the AWS console? You will have an orphan component and it doesn't work. You don't have a big picture of a whole infrastructure, but you have individual components. And actually this launch and learn came from one of Developer Town's clients. They have done something similar with a custom tool a previous contractor created. They were using the SDK, which is kind of nice, but if you enter the project, you don't know the big picture, how many buckets there are, how many lambdas there are. You don't have like a full list of resources, updated resources or current ones. And the final one is the one we are going to focus here, is the CDK, right? Is easy, it looks easy, easy as creating an object. And I think after Hello World, this is the next thing we usually do, right? Creating an object from a class. So good thing is that you don't need to learn anything new. You're just using your existing knowledge, your current language you're used to, and also despite it has some properties, you don't have to learn it. It's all typed, so you can use the autocomplete feature, and it has like a self-documented. I'll show you in a minute. But the good thing here is that everything is part of a stack. So you're not creating individual components, but you are creating like a set. And actually, let me show you really quick, just on here sample. We have like a list of resources that I know which buckets are created, bucket policy, your platform, and a certificate. So you have a current list of all the components within this project or site or whatever. And despite you can use one of the languages to define this bucket, for instance, it gets transformed to like a low-level languages, which is the CloudFormation. So it all comes to this. So, but actually you don't need to do anything because it is auto-generated. So you will focus on creating objects, passing properties, and it automatically, it will do it for you, which is a good thing. Okay, there's a couple of pros and cons, right? Every tool has pros and cons, but let's focus first on the pros. One of the pros is that it uses the common language we already use, right? Most of us have worked with Python or either Java, .NET or TypeScript, JavaScript. So it's easy to reuse what we already know, right? Good thing. Logic and infrastructure are in the same place, in the same place, which means that maybe you are new to a project and somebody gives you access to the repo and you can see what the business logic is, but you can see what the infrastructure is, right? You can understand because it is the same language of the app you're creating or API or whatever you're creating. So it's a good thing to have it both on the same repo. Third, there's versioning and testing, which is kind of cool because you can test your infrastructure and not only focus on the code working well, but only on the infrastructure working fine, right? And actually, let me show you real quick an example. I have this project and I'll run my testing. Hopefully it will run okay. Sweet. And there you go. You have a working file. So you are bulletproof also on the IT side of things. Next, we have basically transactional feature, which is a good thing because if you mess your code or whatever, it has rollback functionality. So if something fails in the middle of the deployment, it automatically roll back and leaves you a clean stack, so you don't have any if you have any errors during the deployment, it won't mess the whole process, because if everything went fine, so you make sure that everything went fine and you don't have any errors to deal with. All components are part of a stack. I showed you this earlier, where we can find in the AWS console. On this specific project or website, I can have a list of all resources, which is good. It basically gives you like a documentation out of the box to make sure that we are using these resources. It is well documented because everything is typed. Let me show you a really quick example. This one. Let's say you are creating a bucket, so you need to find out what props you need to send. You can use your IDE to see all the properties, whether they are required or not. The data type you need to send, right? So it is easy to create a bucket and use these. Maybe, I don't know, this is a boolean, so I pass like a false value and that kind of stuff. So it's easy to get started with the tool, and it's an easy learning curve because we're using the existing knowledge that you know and you use daily. But also we have some cons, right? Not all tools are perfect. This tool is fairly new. It's sometimes unstable, and actually, if we see, let me show you the npm package is actually 2 years old, so it's not as stable as some other tools. And if you mess up with some properties and maybe you have a lot of dependencies with your components, it will fail. So it's not 100% sure it's going to work, but they are getting there. Second, it's not fully implemented because, as you may know, Amazon has a lot of service to offer. They have Internet of Things, security, databases, machine learning. They have a bunch of services, so it's really huge, and it's a hard work to create all the pretty interfaces for all these languages. So for some languages, some services, that are not that popular, they have still experimental or public beta for these packages. So it's not fully implemented. But for the other services that are more common, like S3, Route 53, databases and all the stuff, they have working packages, so ready to use. It is the AWS only, the third con. This is a bummer because if you or your client are using maybe Google Cloud or Azure DevOps or I don't know, DigitalOcean, whatever provider, so this tool is not for you, unfortunately. And probably you need to focus on the Terraform, which is, I know that most people uses, but again, you need to learn a new syntax and documentation, etc. And at the same time, it's missing documentation. It's well documented for one side, but missing documentation for the other one, because if you can see the examples, yeah, they have a couple of examples, but they don't cover everything. So I guess that there's not a huge community around this. So if you don't know anything, you have to basically trial and error. And let me, okay, next. This is the last slide, I promise. Let's see some useful commands, right? We have a bunch of commands that are basically self-explanatory. And now let me show you a couple of those. First, if you install your your tool, you will have to init your project, right? Most of front-end developers uses maybe they create React app to like a bootstrap your code, and this is what this command does. It's basically a scaffolding for your project, and it gives you, let me show you, your like a main entry point, which in which you have to configure your account ID and region. It also gives you like a main block of code where you define all your resources and your test file. So it gives you like a easy way to get started. The synth command, I'll skip the bootstrap, but the synth command is basically what I just told you earlier, where you make a pretty good code that you create in a bucket, but actually it gets dumped, it is transformed to a template. You don't have to learn anything, you don't have to deal with this template, but it is auto generated. So that is what this command does. It basically dumps all the template file. The diff command, sorry, what it does is basically it gives you all the difference between, let me run diff file. I'm going to modify this name. Let's say I did some change and I want to see what changed. So I run the diff command, and it will give you the components that changed. In this case, this property, website configuration, the index document. So when I deploy again, it just modify this thing and it will not recreate the whole thing from scratch. So good thing. And basically the deploy and destroy are self-explanatory. They transform your code from your code to the AWS console, and destroy basically cleans all your stack and leave it clean. And I'm not going to show you like a real example of these commands because it actually takes some time, but let me show you. It will look basically like this. Create all the components, and there you go. You have your working stack with all the components that were created. And if you see on this screen, it actually oops, sorry. It actually takes some time. It took around 17 minutes, but I created like a certificate, and it has to be approved. So but yeah, it's take around 8 to 10 minutes. So I'm not going to show you that. Okay, so that was a long presentation, a lot of theory, but let's see some examples, right? Let's see some code. I prepared basically 3 examples that most of us are familiar with. This is like maybe like for a front-end guy that wants to deploy your cool app, your Angular app, your website, your portfolio, I don't know, your static website. And this is what you usually do, right? Store your files in a bucket. Prepare like a CDN or a CloudFront distribution before the bucket. That distribution uses like a certificate manager just to have it SSL in your site and people access from internet. Pretty straightforward, right? So let's see how it's being done. This is my stack. This is the main code. I'm creating basically one object for one component. I have the certificate, which this is my domain name. This is a free domain, by the way. And the validation method, it is this one, a certificate. Then you create like a bucket to store all your files. This is the bucket name, and it's probably read access because it has to be public. And your CDN, which basically take the object you just created as an origin, and the certificate you just created as certificate. So it's around 40 lines of code. It's not that much, but let's see how is being deployed. Okay, and by the way, thank you Developer Time for letting me use their account, their AWS account. And if you don't have an AWS account, you can create one for free. It is 1 year free trial. We have some limitations, but if you want to explore and experiment with this tool, it's a good way to start. Okay, so let's see this diagram. You have your bucket. Let's see if the bucket is created. You have your bucket created. It's okay. It has an index file on it just to test it. It has CloudFront distribution. There you go. Your CloudFront is pointing to your bucket, and it has a certificate. So everything is. Let's see the certificate really quick. Okay, there you go. You have your domain, and it has a validation of success. Everything is fine. So let's see it real. You can access your URL, it has a certificate, valid certificate, custom domain name, and voila, you have your cloud native distributed containerized RESTful microservice based on ARM with Kubernetes Hello World as a service. Pretty fancy, right? Okay, this is what we usually do when we are creating like a static site. But what happens when you're creating maybe an API? You're a backend guy, you want to create some APIs, some routes, and this is like a pretty common scenario where your app hits an API gateway which has 2 routes in it, and these 2 routes are backed with a Lambda, and obviously you have a custom domain for the API. So let's see how it's being created. Again, pretty straightforward, right? Create an object for the certificate, creating your Lambda, and actually this Lambda grabs this folder, and the main file doesn't only have 2 routes, the hello and the date, which is pretty straightforward. This Lambda, for instance, is running with Node, maybe. You define your API gateway, sorry, which is the main entry point, and you have your Lambda handler as a parameter, doing some options, the custom domain, you pass the certificate, some policies, and you add your 2 routes, your hello and date as get methods. So nothing too fancy, just we are used to this. But let's see it live. I just show you the previous example, but here is the same thing. You have your function. I didn't have to create anything manually. It automatically creates for me. You have your Lambda. You can monitor your Lambda, whatever you want. You have your runtime. You have your code that I just showed you earlier. And even you have maybe an environmental variable to pass to that function. Okay, so let's see if it works. And there you have it, your custom domain with your certificate, and it gives you a JSON with a message. Nothing too crazy, right? And the date, let's test the date. Yep, it gives you the current date. So it basically works as an API should work. And for a more complex, maybe some complex example, I'll just show you like a app with EC2, maybe a little more complicated than this, maybe a real world example. You have your load balancer. It is backed with some auto-scaling group. This is like a server running, and if the amount of users is big, or maybe the server is running high on performance, it auto-scales to a couple of other servers. So this is what companies usually do for maybe saving some resources. And when the load is low, it will just create just one server to deal with the loading. And maybe you're using some static files, some Dynamo table for some database, and maybe some logs stored in CloudWatch. So of course it can be way more complicated, maybe authentication, you can use Cognito. Maybe for your pipeline, you can use all the code pipeline, code build, all the tools AWS provides. Of course, this can be way more complicated and more real if you want to, but let's see some really quick the code behind it. There you have it. I'm just go for this really quick. Just a bucket, VPC, which is like a subnet for all these resources. Dynamo table, you define your Dynamo table. I created a security group just for this, just for testing purposes, just to access SSH. Maybe you are creating some roles to be able to create some logs. Your auto-scaling group, which I'm choosing like a server type for this job, and the minimum capacity will be 1, and if it grows up, it will grow up to 3 servers, and it will auto scale when the CPU utilizations comes around 90%. So, and you're creating a load balancer, and you're basically redirecting your port to 3000 port. That is the inside port. It took around 100 lines of code, which is not a big thing, but actually you save it like 700 lines of code. So you don't have to deal with this file, like a low-level file, but you are creating high-level resources that you are used to create. And there you have it. Let's see the example just really quick. I'm just using the load balancer on this, and there you have it, your hello EC2 world. So it actually doesn't take so much time to create this. You are just defining resources and just hit the deploy command, and you have a working infrastructure right away. So it's a good thing. Okay, final thoughts. I like this tool because basically it's easy to use. I can reuse what I know already, my TypeScript, my Python, my Java, whatever language I'm using. It's a best practice because it actually enforces that good practice or having documented infrastructure. You don't have individual components. You are using good quality code to create your code. It basically expands your knowledge because you can take a dive into the DevOps world if you want. If you're not, you can do simple things, but you still can do some stuff. And last but not least, it is free, so it's open source and you can use it with no charge, so it's a good thing. And thank you guys. That's all. All the examples you can find it on my GitHub, Joel Mora, JobCity AWS CDK. You can find all the examples and all the code that I just showed you earlier. If you have any questions or comments, just DM me. You can find me on Slack, or you know where to find me. So thank you guys. That's all for today.
When you talk about testing, can you show us again that part? It was in the middle of the presentation.
Okay. Yeah.
Possibly show me the code and how do you actually test your infrastructure?
Oh yeah.
Good. Because I don't want to like create a complete infrastructure just to test it, right? So I would like to know like what's the approach here?
Yeah, I forgot to show you that. Actually, I don't know if this is the best way to do it, but actually I'm grabbing the generated template once you have I did the example just with this static website. So you have 3 components and you are already okay with what these components are doing. So what I did is just grab the generated template, which is this one, and I'm validating against the, basically if it matched this template, then I'm okay to use the infrastructure. So I don't know
But
if this is the okay.
But that function match template, what is that? Is it like a text comparison, or is more deeper than that? And it's actually checking the format.
Good question. I don't know if it match exactly the template, or if it just do like a in-depth comparison. But I guess that I'm passing just like a JSON file, so I guess that it will validate against the generated. I don't know if it's smart enough to know. But if you have any other properties, or this is like a custom name, I guess that I can change it and it works. I guess it is validating all the props and not the name or not needed properties.
So it's actually checking the format. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. Again, I'm not sure if it does like a huge comparison property by property, but it's a good way to get started testing your infrastructure. You're just using the template, output template, and that's it. You're making sure that it works.
Yes, just final question. I know Terraform, not from experience, but like I've been like following the community closely on that. So when you mentioned that there are some differences between the CDK and Terraform, what are those? Is the CDK more natural because it's more like TypeScript, JavaScript? So have you ever played with Terraform? That's my question.
Yeah, I have, but actually it's kind of hard for me because you have to, I don't know if we have some Terraform expert, but actually you have to learn anything, a new syntax, right? You have to create resources and like connect a provider, which in this case is AWS, but it's basically you're creating like a template file. You need to learn something else, so you're not using like this, just creating an object. So you are forced to use their syntax and their configuration files. So it is a good thing if you are creating infrastructure for these different platforms like Google maybe or other platforms. But if you are going to be focused on only AWS, I would recommend the CDK option for that. It's like a more complex way to do it. If you want to specialize in DevOps, maybe you should take a look at Terraform. But if you're not going to use it that much, it's the CDK, I think, is easier for us.
Yeah, thanks for that. As Brian said a moment ago, like a new toy to play. Very interesting. No more questions. Thank you so much, Joel.